Alright, so I'm going to be gone, or I am gone today, so I thought I'd record the lecture since we have a test quiz tomorrow for 6th hour, and 5th hour will be 7-5, so you all don't have a quiz until Wednesday. But this is the last section on learning, which is Unit 6, and it is on the vocab sheet. It is number 184 through 225. So 184 through 225 is what you're responsible for the quiz. I'm going to go over, so I have the quiz in front of me, and I'm going over the stuff that we haven't yet covered for the quiz. But first of all, if you go to the website, you can have your terms and the learning handout in front of you. So if you go to the main page of the website, genheimer.com, and then click on Quizlet terms, you can download that. And then if you go to the AP Psych drop down and click on learning, there's all sorts of things, all the videos and the learning handout, which has most of the terms for the unit, as well as a bunch of the videos that we've already seen. Up here on this is what I'm going to go over today in the video, and it's in the top right there, in the top right of the screen. So first I'll review classical conditioning, so using the handout that you have, and if you don't have it, you can go to the website. But classical conditioning, as opposed to operant conditioning, is when you pair two things together, where the neutral stimulus, which ordinarily has nothing to do with anything and wouldn't have a response, is paired with the unconditioned stimulus, which has an automatic response. And once the person or animal has related the two, it becomes the conditioned stimulus, which elicits the conditioned response. So Pavlov, who was the guy with the dog and drilled the hole in the dog's throat, gave the dog food. Food was the unconditioned stimulus because that's something that has an automatic response, which in this case is salivation. So food in this case would be the unconditioned stimulus. The unconditioned response is the automatic response to food, which is salivation. Neutral stimulus was the thing that it always comes before the unconditioned stimulus. So in that case, it was the bell that he rang. The bell becomes the conditioned stimulus once the dog associates the bell with the food. And then the conditioned response is the new learned response to the bell. But that can be for anything, like a dog bite in fear with a phobia. If you have a dog bite and then, a dog bites you, and then the automatic response would be fear or pain or whatever. The neutral stimulus would be seeing a dog, which once you associate dogs with biting, it would become the conditioned stimulus of seeing a dog, and the conditioned response would be fear. That's classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is Pavlov. So, this guy with the dog on my poster that's on above the whiteboard. Pavlov was classical conditioning. And John Watson actually, let's watch a video of his. And then Skinner is operant conditioning. He's the guy with pigeons. Here is John Watson's experiment that he did. So he has a rat on his shoulder in the picture, and here's why he has a rat on his shoulder on the picture.
In the early part of the 20th century, psychologists John Watson and Rosalie Rayner set out to teach a baby boy called Little Albert to fear white rats using the principle of classical conditioning. This is a film of their work. The film shows several phases of their study. First, as you see here, the investigators demonstrated that prior to conditioning, Little Albert had no fears of any animals, including, of course, white rats.
So here we see the baby that's hanging out with the dog. He's like, hey man, I'm cool with this. He's a little bit concerned, but he has no real fear of the dog. The goal that Watson's trying to do is he's trying to find out a way to make the baby afraid of, well actually rats, but to make it further generalized to things like dogs and stuffed animals. So he's trying to figure out a way to make this baby afraid of that dog, which he's currently not afraid of. And what he found was, well, he needed to, using classical conditioning, he wanted to pair something scary with the rat as a neutral stimulus to become a conditioned stimulus that would then make the baby afraid of, the scary thing would be the unconditioned stimulus, and then the rat would be the neutral stimulus, which would become a conditioned stimulus with fear. So here the baby has no problem with the bunny. He's just hanging out.
Watson and Rayner then sought to teach Albert to fear white rats through classical conditioning. In the conditioning phase of the study, which was not filmed, the investigators struck a steel bar with a hammer whenever Albert reached for a rat, making a very loud noise that greatly upset and frightened Albert. After 6 such pairings of the loud noise and the rat, it was believed that the boy had been conditioned to fear white rats. That is, Albert was now expected to react fearfully to white rats, whether the rats were paired with loud noises or not. In this next film sequence, we see Albert interacting with a white rat after the conditioning process.
All right, so now
the investigators believed that the child's reaction during this trial demonstrated his newly acquired fear of white rats. Finally, the investigators expected that little Albert's conditioned fear...
Baby's afraid of the rats, and so now you can see the baby is, whenever a rabbit's put in front of it, he's crying now. He's trying to get away from the rabbit. Really mean experiment. Old psychologists, mean to babies, mean to animals, mean to pretty much everything. But, you know, what are you going to do? There's a dog being dragged by its throat. That's nice. But the baby's also afraid of the dog because it's generalized. So they had the rat and they clung to steel bar, make a loud noise, and now baby's afraid of the dog. Next scene is going to be a big old stuffed bear. Baby's afraid of that too, generalization. The next scene is John Watson, this guy, putting on a terrifying mask of nightmares. So see this next scene and see if you think that John Watson is scary here. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that kid's going to have nightmares for his life. For sure. So there's John Watson. Let me bring myself back up here, as well as the window. There we go. All right, let's go over operant conditioning. So that's classical conditioning. Operant conditioning is B.F. Skinner. So Skinner is this guy with the pigeons. And operant conditioning is you can make a behavior increase or decrease depending on what you do after the behavior. So with the types of reinforcement, there's 4 types. You can either have positive or negative, and it doesn't mean good and bad. I talked about that earlier, but positive doesn't mean good, negative doesn't mean bad. It just means positive giving something and negative taking something away. So if I spank you, that's positive. And if I take away homework or a candy bar or something, that would be negative. So yelling at someone is positive because it's adding something. Reinforcement is if you want a behavior to decrease, it encourages behaviors, and punishment is if you want a behavior to decrease. So then positive reinforcement would be adding something to increase a behavior. Negative reinforcement would be taking something away that's bad. Positive punishment would be adding something bad to punish behavior, and negative punishment would be taking something away that's good. So and timeout is always negative. And then the schedules of reinforcement. So if you reinforce every single time, it's going to be continuous. If you don't reinforce every single time, it's going to be one of these 4. So it will either be fixed or variable. Fixed means you know when it's going to happen. Variable means it's random or you don't know. And then it will also either be ratio or interval. Interval is based on time. And ratio is you get a chance to be rewarded every time something happens. So let's see. Monthly paychecks, you know exactly when they're going to happen based on time, interval. People we've already gone over. Little Albert you just watched. I do want you to see. So here's a Skinner box. They call it. It's called a Skinner box or an operant conditioning chamber. But Skinner put these pigeons in boxes, and here's how they acted in the box.
Gives every indication, because he's been taught to distinguish between 2 words and to behave appropriately. He's learned his different response to each sign by being rewarded with food. So the bird isn't acting independently. Its behavior is shaped by controlling its environment. The first task was to isolate an individual piece of behavior and see how that could be changed. Skinner did this by keeping individual pigeons at about 3/4 of their normal weight, so that the birds were always hungry, and food could be used as an automatic reward. The pigeon was studied in a uniform box, one it quickly grew used to. One piece of behavior, pecking a coloured disc, was measured on a graph. The pigeon learned that pecking the disc produced a reward. Then the behaviour of pecking could be studied in relation to how often that reward was offered, or in Skinner's terms, what was the schedule of reinforcement.
So there's a Skinner box. Let's put myself back up here in the window. Cool. That's Skinner. So Skinner operant conditioning, Pavlov and Watson both classical conditioning. Watson did Little Albert, Pavlov did the dog and salivation, and then Skinner did the pigeon. Primary and secondary reinforcers. So primary reinforcers, these are the types of reinforcement you can have. Primary reinforcers are inherently reinforcing, and secondary reinforcers represent something that's reinforcing. So primary reinforcers would be like food, drugs, all these things inherently feel good. Secondary reinforcer is still reinforcing, but it's not inherently reinforcing. So it represents your ability to obtain a primary reinforcer. So like money, there's nothing inherently good about money other than that it represents your ability to buy a primary reinforcer. So with money you can buy food, and food inherently feels good. Also grades. Grades are a secondary reinforcer because there's nothing inherently anything about grades. They just represent your ability to do well in a class. Let's see. Insight. Insight is a sudden solution to a problem, so that's the aha moment. So if you're in math class and then you all of a sudden get the solution to the problem, that would be insight. Extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. There's two types of motivation. Intrinsic motivation is being motivated to do something because you enjoy doing it. And then extrinsic motivation is motivation to do something for a reward. So like, let's see. One of the dangers with rewarding for someone for something they used to be inherently interested in is it can shift the motivation from intrinsic to extrinsic. So you probably are, well, some of you might be, but for math at McGinnis, you're probably not intrinsically motivated to do math. You're motivated because if you don't do it, then you get a bad grade. That would be extrinsic motivation. If you play the guitar without getting paid, then that would be you'd be intrinsically motivated to play the guitar because you'd enjoy playing the guitar for its own sake. But when you're rewarded for intrinsic motivation, you risk shifting it to extrinsic. Like a professional sports player, someone that loves playing baseball and then all of a sudden made the professional league and now is paid, might like it less, is one potential risk. Superstition. So one of the funny things about schedules reinforcement is that we can actually make a pigeon be superstitious. So in this video, let's see. So there's four types of the schedules reinforcement. Once you have a pigeon that is trained to peck a disc or do whatever, so the pigeon is trying to figure out what it is that gets it food. So it pecks a disc and it says, oh, okay, it's pecking the disc that gets me food. Or maybe you've trained it so that it needs to turn once. Oh, okay, it's turning once that gets me food. If you have a pigeon that's previously been trained to do this, and then you shift, that would be some sort of ratio schedule, probably fixed ratio schedule, where if it turns once, then it gets food, or it turns 5 times, then it gets food. And you shift it from that to a fixed interval schedule. So instead of it being based on what the pigeon's doing, it just kind of gets rewarded sometimes. So that'd be fixed interval. So like every 20 seconds, you just drop a food pellet. The pigeon has been trained to be looking for patterns. And so now the pigeon will have turned a little bit and then got the food. And so the pigeon's thinking, oh, what did I do? So the pigeon turns a little bit more and then gets food again. Now you have pigeons that are spinning in circles rapidly. But here's a video about, and this is something that's actually been done, about pigeon superstition.
Like most living creatures, the pigeon quickly associates the pressing of the lever and the reward. But when a timer releases a seed automatically every 20 seconds, the pigeon wonders, what did I do to deserve this? If it was flapping its wings at the time, it'll continue to flap, convinced that its actions have a decisive influence on what happens. We call this pigeon superstition.
And same thing with humans. And if you ever go into a casino, you watch the old ladies, and they have the same superstitious behaviors for the same reasons. Let's see what we got left. Should be just about getting close to done. Observational learning, another type of learning. We haven't talked about that yet, but observational learning was started by Albert Bandura, who's not on the poster, but started observational learning. And he had this famous experiment called the Bobo doll experiment. Bobo doll was that inflatable, let's see if I can bring up a frame. There it is. So it's that inflatable clown doll that's weighted on the bottom, so if you punch it, it comes back up. So they had this modeling experiment where they had children behind a piece of glass, and they were watching adults interact with the doll. The adults did one of two things. They either played nicely with the Bobo doll, or they had a hammer that they would pick up that was laid on the side of the room, and they'd start beating the doll. And non-surprisingly, the children, for the most part, mimicked exactly what they saw the adults do. Here's that.
Model pummeled the doll with the mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly.
And this is observational learning from Bandura.
Threw it down and beat it. It was once widely believed that seeing others vent aggression would drain the viewer's aggressive drive. As you can see, exposure to aggressive modeling is hardly cathartic. Exposure to aggressive modeling increased attraction to guns, even though it was never modeled. Guns had less appeal to children who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling. The children also picked up the novel hostile language.
Good grief. Right. What's left? Mirror neurons. Mirror neurons, last part. Well, before that, let me just let you watch this teeny clip of that it relates to it. So let me bring me off. And that off. And watch this, and we'll watch this for about 30 seconds, and I'll talk about it.
The story will continue in a moment.
Here, Alex Honnold is 2,600 feet above the Yosemite Valley floor, trying to haul himself up the slippery granite wall of
So I forgot to say, Alex Honnold is a free climber, which means that he climbs things without ropes. So if he falls, I mean, ordinary people that do rock climbing, I do a little bit of it, but have ropes. So if you fall 1 foot, but he is a free climber, which means that he uses no ropes. So if he messes up once, he dies.
Trying to haul himself up the slippery granite wall of Sentinel. He's so high, he disappears into the mountain. Alex moves seamlessly across a section of flaky, unstable rock, pausing to dry a sweaty hand in his bag of chalk. There's nothing but him, the wall, and the wind. He's up here without ropes or a safety harness. All he has is a pair of rubber climbing shoes. This is what climbers call free soloing, and it's so dangerous that less than 1% of people who climb attempt it. Do you feel the adrenaline at all?
So the point is, if you feel your hands getting sweaty at all, that is because of what's called mirror neurons. And I have a lot of people that will get sweaty hands after watching that video, because mirror neurons are a type of brain cell neuron that fires when you watch someone do something or if you do it yourself. So same thing if I were to play, I don't have one up here, but if I were to play a video of someone eating ice cream, you can actually sort of literally taste the ice cream because of mirror neurons. So it's a type of cell that fires when we see someone do something or when we do it ourselves. And that is it. So for the rest of the time, just be on Quizlet, and we have a quiz tomorrow.